We've talked about dragons. We've talked about the physics of the sky. But now I want to talk about something that hits much closer to home. Something we all deal with every single day, but we almost never think about how hard it is to fake. I'm talking about food. In 2007, Pixar released Ratatouille. And if you watch that movie today, nearly 20 years later, the food in that film still looks better than what you see in most modern big-budget blockbusters. But getting it to look that way wasn't a matter of just drawing it tasty. See, back in the early 2000s, CG food was a disaster. If you look at early 3D movies, food always looked like plastic. Grapes looked like marbles. Bread looked like brown rocks. Soup looked like orange paint. The computer just didn't understand organic softness. The director of Ratatouille, Brad Bird, knew that if the audience didn't want to reach through the screen and eat the food, the movie was a failure. The food wasn't just a prop, it was the co-star. So Pixar did something radical. Just like DreamWorks sent their team to flight school, Pixar sent their animators to culinary boot camp. This wasn't some 1-hour how to chop an onion demo. They brought in Thomas Keller, who is essentially a god in the culinary world, the chef behind the French Laundry. And they told their animators, drop the mouse, pick up a knife. You aren't drawing chefs anymore. You are chefs. Imagine these animators, people who usually spend 12 hours a day in a dark room with a coffee and a computer, suddenly standing in the middle of a high-pressure professional kitchen in San Francisco. They had to learn the language of the kitchen. They didn't just watch people cook. They were forced to chop vegetables for hours. Why? Because Brad Bird wanted to capture the muscle memory of a professional. He noticed that a real chef doesn't look at their hands when they chop. They have a specific way of tucking their fingers so they don't lose a tip. They have a specific slouch when they've been on their feet for 14 hours. He told the animators, if I see a character hold a knife like a suburban dad at a BBQ, the scene is ruined. But then the physics team stepped in. And this is where it gets nerdy. They realized that the secret to making food look real isn't the color, it's the heat. Think about a copper pot on a stove. To a computer, that's just a brown cylinder. But Pixar realized that a hot pot changes the air around it. They spent weeks just filming soup. Not because they like soup, but because they were obsessed with viscosity. They noticed that as a sauce reduces and gets thicker, the bubbles pop differently. A thin broth has tiny, fast-popping bubbles. A heavy cream sauce has slow, lazy bubbles that leave a crater behind. The tech team actually wrote a brand new fluid dynamics program just to simulate the pop of a thickening sauce. They even studied steam. Most people think steam is just white smoke, but Pixar's physicists realized that steam carries moisture and weight. It clings to the bottom of a shelf. It makes the air shimmer. If you watch the movie closely, you can actually tell how hot a dish is just by the way the air wiggles above the plate. They were building a world where you could almost smell the screen. But the kitchen boot camp wasn't just about the delicious side of the job. To make the world feel lived in, they had to understand the gross side of reality too. Brad Bird told the team, a real kitchen is a war zone. It's greasy, it's stained, and things are constantly breaking down. And that leads us to the most famous and arguably the most disgusting experiment in the history of Pixar. An experiment that involved a tray of strawberries, a time-lapse camera, and a smell that reportedly cleared out an entire hallway of the studio. So, the Pixar animators are now trained chefs. They can chop an onion in seconds, they understand fluid dynamics, and they know how steam shimmers. But Brad Bird, the director, had one more challenge. He said, if everything is perfect, it's not a kitchen. It's a commercial. I need to see the grit. And that is how the rotten fruit experiment was born. In the film, there's a scene where the rats are in a compost pile. Now, most studios would just draw a brown, lumpy hill and call it trash. But Pixar wanted to know exactly how light interacts with dying organic matter. So, they did the unthinkable. They took a giant tray of fresh food, strawberries, oranges, baguettes, wheels of brie cheese, and they put it in the middle of their workspace. And they just left it there. They set up a time-lapse camera and let the food rot for weeks. Imagine being a world-class animator, walking into work every morning to the smell of liquefying strawberries and fuzzy blue-green oranges. They watched the way a strawberry doesn't just turn brown, but how it collapses under its own weight as the cell walls break down. They studied the specific way mold spreads like a forest. They did this for a shot that lasts 3 seconds. But here's the genius part. By studying the rot, they discovered the secret to making the fresh food look better. They learned about subsurface scattering. Think about a grape. If you hold a grape up to the sun, it's not opaque like a rock. The light goes into the grape, bounces around inside the juice, and makes it glow from within. The rot experiments taught them exactly when that glow dies. They realized that freshness is just the way light moves through moisture. If the light doesn't bounce around inside, your brain tells you, that food is old, don't eat it. Because they mastered the physics of rot, the final Ratatouille dish at the end of the movie looked so vibrant that people in theaters reported actually feeling hungry. They had cracked the code of visual deliciousness, but they didn't stop at the food. They looked at the environment. They realized that a real kitchen has digital grease. They spent hours studying how soap bubbles stick to the side of a dirty sink. They looked at the burn scars on real chefs' hands and added those tiny details to the character's skin. They even studied the way a chef's apron gets stained. It's not just a random splash, it's a specific pattern based on how they wipe their hands while they work. Then came the final test, the taste test. The movie ends with the confit bialdi, the specific version of ratatouille designed by Thomas Keller. It's a beautiful spiral dish of thinly sliced vegetables. The animators had to render every single slice of zucchini and eggplant with its own level of translucency. When the movie was finally screened for professional chefs, they didn't look at it and see a cartoon. They looked at it and saw respect. They saw that the steam was moving right. They saw that the knives were sharp. They saw that the sauce had the correct sheen. Pixar spent millions of dollars and thousands of hours on things that most people would call overkill. They went to cooking school. They smelled rotten fruit. They wrote custom code for bubbles. But why? Because Pixar knows that the man telling a story secret is this. The more you respect the truth of the world, the more the audience will believe in the fantasy of the characters. You believe a rat can cook because the kitchen he's cooking in is 100% real. The physics are real. The decay is real. The heat is real. The Ratatouille cooking school proved that if you want to make a masterpiece, you have to be willing to get your hands dirty. You have to be willing to smell the rotten strawberries to appreciate the fresh ones. And that is why, nearly 20 years later, when Remy takes that first bite of cheese and strawberry, and the colors start exploding behind his head, we don't just see it, we taste it.